Welcome everybody to another Wednesday finance meeting. We have, normally these start about the PFM recommendations, but really the original purpose of these meetings, I think, was to manage and participate in the budget review and development process. And we all know at this time of the year that the fancy of all men and women in Cumberland County turns to matters of budget, the budget for the next year. And on schedule, we have our finance department today to give their preliminary presentation on the budget, how we've done 2014, how we project going on to the end of the year, and how things look for 2015 and for subsequent years. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our trio.
Larry gave a very good update on what we're going to present, and as normal, the data is presented from the focal point of the general fund. So we've talked about the subsidies as opposed to the overall entire budget of the county. In 2013, we ended the year with a $20.9 million fund balance, which is 101 days of budgeted general fund operating expense. Some of the changes that occurred over the previous years is the cost of living adjustments. The step increases were frozen in 13 and 14, tax increases in 13 and 14, other expenditure cuts and revenue increases that included increased fees, decreased subsidies, and some one-time savings, changes to the medical insurance plans, and there were some changes in retirement, and gain share was implemented in 2014. In 2014, we are projecting that the ending fund balance will be $22.7 million. This is an expected increase of $1.8 million, which is 111 days of budgeted general fund operating expense. And the picture just kind of graphically shows the change.
And just to go back, can you explain exactly what the change is?
The $1.8 million.
No, it's, so you got 2014 is bigger than 2013, and that's a good thing.
Yes, it is a good thing. In doing a comparison from the 2013 actuals to where we are projecting to end 14, the salaries are projected to increase about 1%, benefits decreasing about 1.4%, operating is projected to increase about $1.2 million or 7.5%. The majority of that is related to the change in the capital threshold from $1,000 to $5,000 and payments to other agencies. Subsidy is projected to decrease about 0.5% and capital is decreasing about 5%. The comparison on the revenues between 2013 actuals and the projections for 14 is real estate taxes are projected to increase about 4.1%. And other revenues are decreasing about 6.7%. The majority is related to the per capita tax elimination and changes in the indirect cost plan allocations.
Can I almost talk to it for a second? All right, so it's the real estate tax collections that are going to increase by 1.9.
Yes.
That does not mean a real estate tax increase of 4.1%.
The real estate was 3%. And that's a combination of current collections, prior year collections, and the tax increase that created the 4%.
Is that's natural growth then, the remainder of that?
Natural growth in collections. We're still a little bit under 1% on actual change in assessment, but we had a little increase in collections.
So it's late pay. It's late pay.
Some difference. Or we're collecting a little faster than we did in the past. On this slide, we're showing the difference between the April projections and the current projections. And the majority of the difference is caused by the 911 subsidy of $1 million, but the unassigned fund balance is $22.7 million. big major changes. In our last presentation, we highlighted some of the changes that had occurred. One of the things that we've been noticing is overtime has changed, and that's what kind of changes the trajectories of the cost curve when you actually make ongoing changes. So in overtime, in 2012, I'll back up a second, the bars are actual dollars and the line graph is hours. So from 2012, both 2012 to 2013, both hours and dollars decreased, and the same occurred, we're expecting to occur between 2013 and 14. The importance of that is that actually helps change the cost curve.
And that was one of the objectives that we had at the beginning of this year, and that was built into everybody's performance goals, was to try and get those down.
Yes.
And it's, I don't know what it looks like so far, so good.
The 2015 budget is projected to have an ending fund balance of $21 million, which is 101 days of budgeted general fund operating expense. And some of the projected expenses, salaries are increasing 3%, benefits increasing 7.5%, operating at 1.2%, and subsidies at 32%. The biggest increase in subsidies, 911.
Where did we get the projection being to up to 3%? You just plug that in there?
No, we're going through this benchmarking with Gallagher. There may be some adjustment, probably not a lot. So we calculated there might be a percentage point involved in increasing.
Okay, but we make the decision as to whether or not there's going to be a salary increase.
Jim, this
correct?
is a projection based on assumptions. You vote on the budget.
You're building this into the budget, though. I just want to understand.
Yes. Right. So we try to make the assumptions clear up front.
All right, this is a suggestion. Okay, I'm sorry.
What's up with the subsidy? It's 911 because of the accounting change of 1.2 million in 14, the additional wireless funding in 14, and then there's capital in 2013, which is causing the increase.
Let me go back to one question, back to the 3% of the salary. How does what's the impact of transition of performance pay on that?
Well, you won't see that in 2015 because you would see that in 2016.
Okay, so it's not fully implemented until 16.
Right. And as you do that in 2016,
Yeah.
as you make the 2016 budget, you'll need to decide on the size of the pool of funds that you want available.
That's what I was getting
It's
at.
kind of like it's like in health insurance when you do a defined contribution rather than a defined benefit.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. I thought we were going to see some of that in 15, so that's
No.
all 16. Okay.
Right. So that fact, just to get back to Jim's question, this assumption, which is only assumption, it's a working assumption, includes a point for the benchmarking, the potential impact of the benchmarking, plus some kind of cost of living in the vicinity of 2%. That's the working assumption.
And then before we move on the 911 increase, that's the subsidy increase. That's how much more county property taxes payers are expected to pay toward 911 in 2015. Is that correct?
If you remember, in 14, we're taking some one-time savings.
Mm-hmm.
So we made an accounting change that is actually giving county taxpayers the savings in 14. Well, that was one time, so it comes right back in 15.
Okay, so what is the actual increase then in terms of subsidy if you take that one-time savings out of that?
500,000, 600,000. And that includes the wireless money, which we're unsure of where wireless will be after July 1st.
Well, if I understand correctly, we're spending about $6 million on the 911 operation. About half of that now is being paid for by county property tax dollars. Is that correct?
I don't have that right in front of me.
That's probably roughly
It's
correct.
close.
I think it's something like 6.1 or 6.3 total expenses and 3 million plus in change in subsidy.
Okay. All right. real projected increase in the county property tax subsidy of $600,000 about, is what you're saying, if I understood you correctly.
Possibly, yes. It's all going to hinge on the wireless fund. If there, we have to make certain assumptions, so I can't say that it's absolutely going to occur. But based on the assumptions that we made, yes.
Yeah. And why would we expect to get any more from the wireless funding than we got previously? Because there hasn't been any change in the statute at all.
Well, occasionally they do give you extra money at the end of the funding year. That's what occurred in 14. We got a little more than they expected during the
Okay.
budget year because they're running on a different year.
Mhm.
So we don't know what the funding for the year is, but for the
So,
second
but-
half of the year is.
So this is a guess. It's a guess.
Well, it's a guess based on historical precedent.
Yes.
What's reasonable to expect? You're not making this up saying, ooh, 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 you know, we're gonna have this extra money. It's based on the fact that in the past, you do get some of this extra money towards the end of the
It
year.
varies from one year to the next.
And it could be zero. It could
Yeah.
be zero.
I'm saying it varies from one year to the next. What we get from the state, we can't necessarily, but we should have an idea as to approximately what on average we can get from the state.
On the wireless funding, I think it's a little more sporadic than most of our other revenue sources.
Okay.
This slide showing you the preliminary budget for 2015 as it is right now in the first column. Second column is putting it up against where we project 2015 to be. You can see the ending fund balance of 21.6 million. The break-even percentage with our projections is 2.5%. That can always be the change in expenses or revenues, combination of them. Showing you the projections for 2014 through 2018, with the 2014 to 22.7, 15 21.6, 16 18.9. We've got some INTO projects out there in 16 and 17. The other thing we always need to keep in mind is the election machines are out just outside the projection range right now, $2 million of that will be coming at some point in time. This slide's just the graphical representation of the previous slide. Your red bars are the revenues, blue are the expenses. Your green bar is showing you the fund balance projection, where we are right now in August. We also put the yellow line on there so that you can see where our projections were in April. So that you can see as changes are being made, projections are changing in the fund balance. You can see where it is now.
Can I be Vanna for a second? So we're looking that much better this year than we were last year because of all the things that you said. So last year when we made this projection, our fund balance was going to go down. Here at that rate, it is still on a downward trend based on the fact that, without continuing to change, it would still trend downwards, but on the other hand, it's going at a much slower rate that is a positive. That doesn't mean that we don't have to continue to cut costs and to increase revenues, because what you'd like is for that green line here, the actuals, to be more or less level.
This is broken for me, I'm sorry. No, I mean, with this kind of presentation, I think it would be good to have the paper so you can.
That's okay, Jim.
No, but that's not the thing. It's much easier to go back and forth in a document like this than it is to, try to mess around with this. But I'm sorry, it's just me.
We're on page 16 of the slideshow.
usually when we get a presentation like this, I like to go back and forth and look at things.
You can do that on your tablets, but I have trouble, my thumbs
All
are.
right, well, you're more capable than
No,
I.
my thumbs are too big, I can't do it very well either.
On the slide showing you what fund balance would look like with no changes being made, and that's the top row. The white numbers underneath are showing you basically the difference between revenue and expenses each year, if there were no changes being made. The second scenario is a break-even scenario, and it shows the break-even percentage each year is 2.5 in 15 and 16, 3% in 17, 1.5 in 18. The change, again, revenue or expenses, combination of both. The slides are traditional tree projections showing many different scenarios. In 2015, we have a 0%, 1%, 2%, 3%, and you can see what kind of effect that those changes have in the out years.
And again, all those variances can be made up through any combination of increased revenues or reduced expenses.
This slide shows you the comparative tax rate for the third class counties in Pennsylvania. Cumberland County is still the lowest property tax per capita at $201.
Didn't Cumberland County just get, wasn't it number one on the list of the best places, the best counties to live in Pennsylvania? That they just published a study by some real estate group that took all these statistics and said Cumberland County was number one. Well, we're last on the tax stuff, but we're number one as a public. So I imagine there's an inverse correlation there to some extent.
Any questions?
Back on page 15, the chart that Larry was pointing to, the blue column is actual expenses through
Through 13,
13.
from 14 through 18 are projections.
So in 12, 11, and 10, they're all actuals, right?
Yes,
Through 13.
through 13.
So what we see there, what I'm looking at, is the fact that our expenses actually, if this is accurate, were reduced from 12 to 13.
Yes.
And in 14, there's actually a level of what we spent 2 years ago.
So
Right?
we're down to the one-time savings in 13.
So I think it kind of like demonstrates the effort that we put forth here to control costs, reduce spending where we can. Now, as far as the projections go, as Larry mentioned, they're projections, but they don't necessarily take into account, the additional actions that we may take, to continue to control costs. Okay.
That's why in those tree projections, you see out here, you see small changes. That would be you guys making the changes to it.
And as you mentioned, in collection machines, capital murder, and what had more of the question marks is the children use subsidy. So, overwhelming possibilities here for some significant need coming out of the general fund. I'll throw it out there. You had the 4 question marks, and it kind of got passed on the next slide and not really fully addressed. So, as a concern, to simply raise that, the children use subsidies could impact significantly.
Let's go back to that slide. Yeah, please. I think you just There. There you go. Right, and so those are significant considerations now. To some extent, with some of the additional staffing that we've added, that came about as a result of the issue with the safety plan. When the safety plan thing was then reinstated in a modified form, we did have that presentation with Wendy, and we talked about the need to keep those people in place essentially to meet the projected increase in demand for children and services coming out of that CMSD task force legislation. But as Barb said, she's absolutely correct. To some extent, we've taken measures to try and mitigate the resources that would be needed by being somewhat proactive, but we won't know until we've had a couple of years, or a year of experience under our belts to know what the exact thing is going to be.
Well, there are so many different variables that get thrown into this, and I think we'll making reference to the fact that new laws that have been passed by the General Assembly require us to be more in the area of children and youth services that we didn't do before, and we don't see anybody opening up the checkbook over in Harrisburg to give us the dollars that are actually needed to implement all these new laws that have been passed. So, I mean, that is a big question mark, huge question mark.
And unless the checkbooks are open on 9/11, come the 30th of June 2015, I can tell you that subsidy, you will be thankful that it is 1.9 as opposed to 3.5. So again, if that's addressed at the beginning of the year, we may have a better scenario. If that fails to get addressed by the General Assembly on the 30th of June, we will be back once again with that same scenario.
Well, the fact that we have question marks is really nothing different. We have a general fund budget, part of it always had these unknowns out there, which just underscores the importance of the need for us to be vigilant of the things we do control, understanding if there are things we don't control, and simply moves us to be that much more careful on the things we do control, to not miss any opportunities in those areas to make those changes. I have one question. You mentioned about the election machines. What is do we have a time frame? And we certainly know the lifespan of those in general. Is there?
When I talked to Rose, she had them out there out past 18 for now, but it's basically, you're gonna evaluate them every year to see how long we can
And we had Penny actually had a discussion about that.
In their spare time. Rose does that in her spare time.
Rose does that.
Yeah, got them
But
extended down
we
there.
talked about could we phase the new election machines in? No, you can't, because they all have to be able to communicate with each other. So whatever is done has to be done in one fell swoop. I think we are getting, it's just like when Mark comes in and tells us that we have servers and computers that won't be supported anymore or beyond their expected shelf life. We're in a very similar situation with the election machines. And when it hits, we have to replace them all.
We do have, because you're going to be buying in total, do we have even a rough estimate of what the cost there is? I mean, understanding that the machines could change and
We're at 2 million.
I think that was what Penny said.
do we see that as something we would probably finance through borrowing, or do we see that as being paid out of pocket?
I would hope there's grant,
Hopefully there's grant money available. Well, I heard that before.
But when it comes closer to the time, I think we would have to do the evaluation based on what the interest rates are, of what the funding is available and where we stand financially.
Okay,
But
so we
part
won't
of
know
it-
until much closer as to which is going to be the best deal for us.
Correct.
Financing. Okay.
But I think she's got, what, $250,000 in there for batteries? There was
Yes.
a portion that was not insignificant, simply to replace the batteries of the existing machines, and they had been cycled out, not buying all at one time. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think that was $250,000. That's what it's.
Maybe not that high.
I think she has them spread over multiple years now.
Yeah.
They're in the actual
In,
numbers,
right.
but
But they're not cheap.
no, they're not cheap.
It's not like they have a regular one.
So Larry, just to carry through your thought on the actual projections, the chart that we had. We've seen that cost curve alter.
It's pending.
Okay. So the hope actually would be to continue that practice of changing the curve on that. We're not just accepting that as a given. So, but I assume we have no even basic estimates on it, any ideas on what we can count on seeing, say, next year.
Oh, there's, at this point, about, as far as next year goes, I think, as far as 2015, this would be a conservative projection, because what you're doing is taking statistics from all of these growth rates or variance rates, changes in the rates, and blending it in with these stuff. This stuff is 2 years or 3 years of cost cutting, along with all this, blended in here. So this carries more weight and would tend to neutralize this stuff. However, as we get more years of this kind of cost cutting, what we would expect to see is, again, this thing start to try and get closer to flat. Depending on, I think 2015, this is probably, again, a conservative estimate. I think, depending on some of the other cost-cutting stuff that we see coming down the pike, and again, barring any kind of the major expenses, like the children and youth or anything related with 911, I think this is a pretty reasonable projection, plus or minus, maybe a couple of points either way. But then what we do in 2015 will determine what we get in 2016, and what we should see is this come up here. I mean, that's the grand plan.
So just so I'm clear, when you talk about that, you're not just talking about the cumulative results of the savings that have been found. What you're saying is we still have a lot of heavy lifting to do about the future.
Because we don't want
Cost
to be here, even though this is better than being here, we don't want to be here.
Right.
Because if we were here, we're below the threshold that we would have to do. So we would either have to borrow or raise taxes or some other godforsaken thing. So what we want is, by the time we get to 2018, our target is to be up here someplace. But that requires a sustained effort in cost containment and revenue increase.
Sustained effort. Those are probably the key words here. Do you see any other big targets coming out of the PFM recommendations? I mean, I know that study more or less focused you on those hot topic areas, especially public safety. Are there other right targets that you're looking at, or does it get harder to smaller targets from here on out?
Oh, no, I think we got some big enchiladas up there. I'm a little bit hesitant to, I don't want to be the angel of death here. I don't want to put a cross on anybody's door, but I think if you just look back at some of the things PFM said, there's still areas, I don't think we've begun to do anything significant whatsoever in the criminal justice area, and there's enormous potential. That's number one. The stuff that we're doing to try and reduce our subsidy to CAP and the money that we pay for them, as well as regionalization efforts on shared ride and potentially fixed ride, could bring our costs for any subsidies we give to any transit authority, plus our own internal costs for transportation down. If we implement other things that we're talking about, which and continue to ramp up gain sharing to make it more significant, there's still a lot of potential there. I still think that there are issues about the prison, that there's a big cost there, how you do it, whether you can do it at the prison per se, or again back to the criminal justice system. I think we have to figure out a way. So there are some. We're in a target-rich environment, and I think there are potential. I don't think we've come remotely close to potential savings that we could realize.
All right, so we're not close to declaring victory going
No, not yet. I don't know that we'd ever be there, because there's always, the general rise in costs, there's new services people want, there's replacing existing equipment, and new surprise legislation that comes down without funding from wherever it comes from. One of the big things the prison's going to have to be dealing with, that they have this rape prevention legislation that has no funding that will require them to do additional processing, but our warden and his team has, I think, come up with a way to incorporate this in with minimum amount of additional expense. So it's kind of like, you're trying to cross a river on icebergs, and the icebergs are always shifting, so you have to pay attention what you do, but always keep moving. Don't stop. That was a pretty good metaphor.
That is good.
Remember Gone with the Wind? No, was it Uncle Tom's Cabin? Crossing the iceberg?
No, okay. I thought it was a Larry Thomas original.
No, that
Stole it
was,
from
no,
Holland.
that was before your time.
Okay. No, that's very helpful. Thanks.
One of the things that I think is also reflected in this chart, we still have up there, and it kind of leads me to my another question. But if you look at 9, 10, 11, and 12 there in terms of revenue, I realized that there was no adjustment made by the commissioners with respect to the tax rate. But it also demonstrates pretty clearly there that there was flat growth, no growth. That's in the immediate wake, of the Great Recession. So, and I know that, in order to get, we started the effort to reduce expenditures wherever we could while still protecting services. But then we've also forced here in the past 2 years to increase taxes. My question is what is our growth rate projection now? I realize we're into what some people would call a new normal. But, we have seen, I think, some development projects, around the county that should be benefiting us in terms of natural revenue growth.
On the revenue side, on the tax, the real estate base, we're still seeing growth at a little less than 1%. It takes a lot to move that base. So 1% is a substantial growth. The days of us seeing 3 to 4% natural growth, I don't know that we'll be back there. But in our projections, we have in and around 1% budgeted.
You're not going to see that number move as long as the county continues to engage in a significant debate over anti-growth, anti-development, and preservation, whatever we call it. If we're going to ramp that effort, then don't be surprised when the growth rate falls.
Well, and there's two things. The 3 to 4% is like somebody on that end benefits. It was a result of the artificial housing bubble and those unrealistic and inflated prices, which then became part of the tax assessment base. So I don't think you're going to see them, but what you want is a sustained growth based on a smart, balanced growth policy to give you an extra point or two every year. Now, how you define what that balanced development should look like is a whole other question. But, so I think 1% in any given year under these current conditions is probably more realistic than the 3 to 4 we're getting in the housing growth.
Yeah, all I would say is that, I think if you visit certain areas of our county, there is some development, there is some growth occurring. Some of it is smart growth, actually. And, there's a balance and everything, but we've been going through that for many years. What I'm saying is, I'm looking at the chart. Essentially, I think it, very much reflects, the recession and the lack of interest by developers. And also, I think that because of the financial collapse and the lack of capital for a lot of the projects that we had seen previously, I don't know that that's opening up again. All I'm saying is that I think, we've got a lot of good things going for us. We really do. I think that there's an editorial that Sentinel just the other day that talked about all the positives that we have in our county. And we're doing a lot better than a lot of other places. So, we're going to have these continued discussions about, preservation versus development. I think what's important is that we're very fortunate to live in the county we live. And if you take those numbers, you do it on per capita, but the fact of the matter is, the county's property tax on a similarly assessed home, am I correct, is below every other county, in the region. So in terms of, the level of financial stress that the county is placing on its residents, it's at the very bottom. And of course, we're trying to keep it that way.
But I think there's also more accurate ways to measure that too, which we may want to explore at some point.
Any other questions or comments for our finance folks? I want to thank you for putting together the presentation. It was a pleasure working with you.
Yeah, before we adjourn, Larry, if I could just bring one item up. At the recent executive committee meeting of the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, action was taken to submit Tri-County Regional Planning Commission's budget request to the counties, to Perry, Cumberland County. I would like to request, similar to what we've done with respect to CAP, that we invite the officers of the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission to come into the board and make a presentation on their budget request. They are asking for more than what we allocated last year. And I had a discussion with Larry about this yesterday and also with Kirk. So I would like to set that up in terms of inviting Tri-County Commissioner, Executive Committee to come in and make their presentation on their budget, similar to as we're going to hear about CAT's budget request. CAT's budget request.
I just have one question, Jim.
Yeah.
What is Kirk's?
He agrees,
Okay.
and I ran that past Larry yesterday, and also Kirk, so if they would be.
How much more do they want?
Was it 70?
I don't recall off the top of my head, but it's more than what we have paid.
They're looking for makeup. They're looking for payback.
No, they have, that's why I think it's important they come in and describe the plan so that we can ask some questions about it. And, we do need, I think, to reach an understanding, the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission on functions. And of course, also taking a look, like we're doing with everything else, we're looking under the hood, taking a good look at what the actual costs are, what the needs are, and, funding those things that we need to fund, and then maybe not funding those things that we don't need to fund. So I think it's important that these, the outside entities also go through the same process that we're putting everything else in county government through, so.
Yeah, I agree with that, except that one caveat on that is I would definitely want Kirk there to be able to help guide that conversation.
Yeah.
Because in the past, what has happened is these groups have essentially bypassed Kirk and come in and make their own presentations, and then there are planning decisions made at one level that are completely disengaged from
No,
planning decisions.
I agree with you, Gary.
We made a structural change.
much.
Yeah, we made a structural change about 2 years ago in the contractual agreement with them, so that they can no longer bypass planning, and the system is set up that, it runs through Kirk, and Kirk brings us the planning budget, and Tri-County's allocation is no longer seen as a grant. Our budget request is now part of Kirk's budget. It is essentially the regional program of the county's planning. So I would just hate to see us do anything that might encourage a reversal of that, as long as everybody understands at Tri-County that they're still going through Kirk as their primary contact. But it's a good opportunity for us to ask questions of the value of the regional programs.
Well, it gives us an opportunity to ask our questions and hopefully get direct answers relative to this entity, which is separate and apart from our county. But I also, it is important, and Kirk is 100% in agreement. I think it's a good idea, and that certainly will be an integral part of our questioning on questions.
All right, thanks, folks.